My name is Dr. Tom Allen. I'm the co-PI with Dr. Petito of the VL2 Science of Learning Center. I'm also the director of one of the 4 hubs, the Early Education Literacy Lab, EL2, as you can see up there. I'd briefly like to introduce you to my team, especially Dr. Donna Moreira. She is a faculty member in the psychology department here at Gallaudet, and she has considerable expertise in neurocognitive assessment. Her expertise is very important to the work we do in EL2 and also to VL2 in general. I would also like to thank Ralph Fernandez. He is our database manager in the lab. He's responsible for putting a lot of data into the computers in a good, structured way. He also creates user interfaces to VL2 data. Ralph has been working for VL2 for a short while now. Also pictured here are our 3 research scholars. What do we do in VL2? We do many things, but today I will talk about 2 specific areas. In the first area, we conduct studies of deaf children in the real world. You've heard a lot about VL2 and what occurs in the neuroimaging lab in terms of plasticity. But what happens in schools? What's happening in the classrooms? What's happening in the homes? In our lab, we focus on studying what's going on in these real-world settings. We look at different home and school settings and identify similarities and what changes occur when we put a child in school. The second area is developing and validating new tests that measure language competency and skills. They measure reading skills, and they also measure cognitive skills. We've been creating new assessments since VL2 began, as very tools had been developed previously to measure these skills for deaf children at a young age. So it's an important part of what we do in VL2. Now, these 2 areas are very closely linked because we want to study children in schools. We also need to measure things of what they're doing. But if we don't have valid assessments, we can't do that. So before we even conduct the research, we have to develop new tools. We've been working very hard to develop different assessments at the VL2 Center since its beginning 10 years ago. We've made a lot of progress. Area 1, studies in the real world, what's happening in the classrooms. We've collected a considerable amount of data from homes, from the kids themselves, and from their schools. We'll talk about the exact types of data we've collected in a minute. With this data, we have built large databases. Ralph, of course, is responsible for that. Once the data sets are created, EL2 students work in the statistical labs. We develop complex statistical models. Those models test hypotheses about what we expect to see in the classroom. These models can become very complicated given the number of variables involved. We use those models to publish in a variety of different places. We write books, we attend conferences, we give talks. We also disseminate the information to schools. In EL2, we work very closely with the other VL2 hubs. We often ask what's going on in VL2, which informs us what we should be looking at in EL2. So what data do we collect? First, we are primarily interested in measuring learning outcomes. What are children learning in schools? Second, we ask, what are the predictors of learning outcomes? What characteristics of home and school contribute to learning outcomes? we divide the predictors into two parts. One is things we cannot change about a person. We can't change if a person is deaf or hearing, or if a person is born biologically a male or a female. We can't change that. But some of these unchangeable factors can become predictors for learning outcomes, right? Finally, there are factors we can change, and those are the most important things to look at. What is it about a child's life that we can change to increase their learning outcomes? Our main project over the years has been the Early Education Longitudinal Study, EELS. We've been working on this project since 2008, which is when the planning began. We collected data over a period of 3 years, where we went to schools, collected information, brought it back to the lab. Then the following year, we went back to the same schools, collected more information, and back and forth for 3 years. That allowed us to look at growth, not only at one point in time, but we were able to evaluate growth patterns over time. What makes children change their behavior over time? We studied children who were deaf, not those who were hard of hearing. We focused on children who received most of their information of the world through their eyes. They were ages 3 to 5 in the first year, and then 4 to 5, and then 5 to 6. They came from all over the country. We collected information from 20 different states, and we collected information on a total of 254 children. To date, we have made some very important discoveries, but I'll quickly run through 3 of them very quickly. First, language is a single underlying trait of human development. What does that mean? In the EELS study, we collected data on children's ASL skills. We collected information on their fingerspelling skills. And we collected information on their English competency. So there were 3 different language forms. We separated them and looked at each of them individually. Then we came back to the lab and we did more extensive analysis. And what did we find? We found that ASL and fingerspelling skills are highly correlated. Kids who master ASL are typically also mastering fingerspelling skills. In our EELS dataset, we also found that English correlated with these skills. Kids who are proficient in one of these languages were also proficient in the other 2. When psychologists look at results like this and see large areas of correlation overlapping, they conclude that all these 3 measures may be measuring the same underlying trait. So they may put them all into the same category and call it language. So, when we see both languages, sign language and English, occurring in the classroom simultaneously, they may be resulting from the same underlying language processes in the brain. Second, we analyzed signing in the home. If there was signing in the child's home, it improved the child's cognition. Parents were given statements that reflected different cognitive skills and asked whether the children had mastered those skills. Then, we took all the parent data and we divided the children into 3 groups. Children who had deaf parents in the home who used sign language, children who were deaf with hearing parents in the home who also used sign language, and then deaf children in homes with hearing parents who didn't use sign language. Those were the 3 groups. So one example we gave them was the child could list 6 items in a category. This is a very important skill for children to develop. If you ask a child to name some animals, they need to be able to name 6 different animals in that category. Or if you say to a child, a bird or a horse, how are they all the same? They should be able to tell you that they're both animals. So we divided the children into 3 different categories, and we calculated the percentage of children in each group that were able to master this skill. And what we found was that for many, many items, the highest performing group was the deaf kids with deaf parents. But deaf children with hearing parents who also signed also showed large benefits in cognition. So it is not necessary for a deaf child to have a deaf parent. The results show that advantages occur when parents sign, not whether or not they are deaf or hearing. Finally, ASL and fingerspelling contribute to reading and literacy. Remember I said we did a longitudinal study where we went back to the schools 3 times. We divided the children into 3 groups, and we evaluated their overall reading ability, but also the rate of their growth over time. We plotted the growth trajectories on the same graph. Now, obviously, that's a little complicated, but you can see different kids growing in different ways. They're performing at varying abilities, and they are also learning at different rates of growth. Because we measured their skills in ASL, what do? We cut the top 25% and the bottom 25% in terms of ASL skill, and then we averaged them for their rates of growth in reading skill. We found that kids who have high ASL competencies excel in overall reading at all 3 points in time when compared to kids with lower competency in ASL. But at the same time, we also found that the rate of change was different. The slopes for high ASL group were much steeper and the learning faster. In the longitudinal study, we found that language acquisition leads directly to the development of reading and cognition. Importantly, language can be taught with right tools and the right mechanisms. And we have those in VL2. Finally, I'll talk briefly about ASL assessments, area 2 of our work. I've already mentioned our long history in ASL assessments. We developed different tools and made them available for researchers, teachers, parents, and psychologists to measure mastery. But I want to focus on our most recent assessment tool, the Visual Communication and Sign Language Checklist. This was published and distributed in booklet form to many locations. It's been given to over 4,000 kids nationwide in the United States. This tool allows communication experts to judge the level of mastery children have accomplished based upon their different behaviors. Recently, we developed an online version of the checklist that is now available. Here are a couple examples from the checklist. 1. Children turns head in response to attention-getting behavior. It's a very important communication skill. Or another. A child can ask 2-word questions like, "Doggy, where?" That shows the ability to correctly combine words into a question sentence. Then, the assessment reports on the skills the child is expected to be able to master at specific ages. I want to show you one example from the online version, and then I will leave the stage. This item is understanding conversational turn-taking. It represents a very important skill for kids to learn as they begin to understand the role of turn-taking in social conversations. So we'll look at it quickly. The video is available in the online version. All of the items on the checklist have videos attached to them. Hey, do you remember what happened when the police came? What happened yesterday? Something was stolen. The bad guys. Right. The bad guys came yesterday. What happened this morning? What happened yesterday? The door was open, and the bad guy came and he stole the camera. You can see here in the checklist we have an example of different skills. The assessor can look at the child, look at the checklist, and determine whether or not they've mastered the skill. Then, if you sum them up, you get a very good estimate of the child's overall level of competence in the language. So in that one item, you see that the deaf children who are native signers acquire that skill at about 2 years, 8 months, based upon VL2 research. Each item has an age of development level that we typically expect to see children reach that mastery. So, we've studied the classroom, we've developed assessments, but what's about the future? We have a lot more research and assessment to do in the lab, and that's good now that many states are involved. They're passing laws that require assessments of communication skills for deaf kids from birth to 5. So we're already getting a lot of calls about the VCSL. In fact, it's being used in a couple states already. We have a lot of work left to do, and we want to make our work spread to all of the states and all the communities so that they have a valid assessments of their deaf children. Thank you.